Welcome to the Cloudless Mind podcast about neuroscience and non-duality. Introducing your hosts, Paul Smit and Scott Byrd.
Well, welcome back to the Cloudless Mind podcast. Paul and I are back for another exciting edition. Today, we're going to look at a topic that is really near and dear to so many people's hearts, and it's the idea of habits. And really habits and willpower, and using the willpower to alter, change, or just get rid of a certain habit. So, Paul, first of all, hello. How's your world?
Pretty good, actually. Yeah.
What makes it good?
My habits.
Do you have a certain habit that really creates you being good all the time?
I think one of the habits is I sleep enough. I eat quite healthy. I do exercise 5 times a week. So these are the basic ingredients for feeling fit, feeling mentally fit. And of course, if we go down the rabbit hole, there's not actually a me doing this. It's just my programming that's running. But my habits, they work for me, so to speak.
So I would agree with you. If I'm in alignment with if my habits of my sleep and my eating and my exercise, and then basically in my relationships, it's kind of like spokes on a bike tire or something. If they're all solid and they're moving in a certain, in accordance with each other and tight, then my wheel turns pretty well. If just one of those things gets a little out of whack, then my experience is a little different than what you just described. But let's go down the rabbit hole. Since you mentioned it, you opened up the rabbit hole. So let's go down. So we both may have a different way of looking at it. So where do you think habits arise from, Paul?
Well, first of all, over 99% of everything we do takes place at an unconscious level. So it's the unconscious brain that does everything for you. And because our brain wants to save energy, that's why every day we do so many things from routine. Because everything you do by routine, you can do it unconsciously and it saves energy. So therefore, if your routine works for you, it's perfect. But if the routine doesn't work that well, that might be a problem.
But your brain does not distinguish whether it's working for you or not, really. It's just running automatically.
Yes.
As we talk quite frequently about in this incredibly powerful part of our brains. So how would you describe that they actually get created?
We can divide a brain, we've done it before, at 3 layers. So it's the oldest part, the reptile brain, just wants to survive.
Yes.
And it does everything from routine. Then mammalian brain, our limbic system, it wants to gain pleasure and avoid pain. So imagine when we lived on the savannah, your brain had to remember things. So if you would find food somewhere, like a lot of fruits, for instance, you would have a high in emotion, because when you've got a high emotion, the brain remembers things better. That's why everyone knows where they were at 9/11. Because it's a high emotion, so therefore the memory works. But also, if you would enter an area which was dangerous, for instance, you would see a lion, it also creates a high emotion, so the brain remembers not to go there anymore. So it's the emotional brain that remembers what it likes, and it remembers what it wants to avoid. And it still goes for us these days. And then we got the neocortex, the latest part of the brain. That is actually the brain that overestimates itself constantly. That's the storyteller in our head. That's where all the clouds arise mentally. And that's also where your brain creates the joke of willpower.
Yeah, and we're going to get deeply into that. So what you're saying, what it sounds like you're saying, is that we basically, from a brain level, we are constantly creating habits that move us towards what we might consider pleasure or avoidance of pain. And just like a computer algorithm, it learns over time and it continues to build on itself.
Yes.
And create strategies that seem to have something solved for, right? So,
Yes.
and what we'll take a little deeper look at how these habits are essentially solving for something at the brain level, right?
Yeah, but there is a tricky part about the brain, because imagine you would enter an area and you would encounter a lion. Your brain remembers, don't go there because there's a lion.
Right.
So you tell this to your group, and their belief system arises that this area is dangerous, we should not go there. That's the basis of religion, actually. So also these days, we've got so many belief systems in our head, so many assumptions that are actually not true. It's been installed in your brain at one point, and because your brain could go out there and check again for the lion, but of course your chances of survival would decrease by that. So it's better to just assume and make the judgment like it's dangerous, don't go there. But imagine right now we've got thousands and thousands of belief systems inside our head, and a lot of them don't work for us.
Right.
So sometimes it can be very useful to analyze your belief systems.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that we're not typically predisposed to do, because we are organized in our brain in many ways that we're right about things. I mean, that's sort of the default way of being, right? That's something that, and by the way, I'm sure you would agree, for us to start to examine our belief system is going to take up a little bit more energy than our brain actually wants to do.
Yeah.
So we often talk about that type of activity is not going to be very prevalent to go and examine your belief systems, especially if you're not in a place of like what we speak about often, in a place of extreme pain or, really extreme passion, where we're able to go ahead.
So like the philosopher thinks about these things, but this comes from passion. And if we look at a biological level, it is to show to the women or man, look how intelligent I am. I can think about life. So that's passion. And the other one is, of course, urgency or deep pain. So when do people examine their belief systems? Mostly when they're in pain. That's when the search begins.
Sure. And one of the things I work a lot with in my own work with my clients and the executives I work with is that pain typically serves to create what I would call, what I call like this momentum. You've got to create this escape velocity in order to be able to go past the incredibly powerful part of your mind that needs, if you don't have this thing that's going to create that escape velocity, which is typically this pain, then we're most likely, and it's just a human function, we're going to stay the way that we are. So I think it's a really important thing to look at, and it shows just how strong our belief systems are.
Yes.
Because in order to really dismantle a belief system, most likely you're going to have something that's a lot different than your normal way of walking through the world.
Yeah.
It's going to be at a place where you've literally had it. You cannot actually live another day is where you're going to get your most power to create that escape velocity.
True.
Well, it's so when we talk about this thing about habits and we talk about change and changing those habits and the like, I'm always fascinated by, I'm always, driven by the idea that I know that this is it's coming from a belief system. But I thought it might be interesting, or I think it might be interesting right now to talk a little bit first before we go deeper into these belief systems. Paul, is any belief true?
No, there's no such thing as objectivity. So even mathematics is not true. It's only true because we believe certain parameters to begin with. So we don't know. And I mean, we could say you're sitting on a chair, but the chair is a belief system, right? Because if we cut it in half, is it still a chair?
Right. Exactly.
So and when is something a knife, and at what point does it become a sword?
Right. Well, and so this is such an incredibly important point in what we're talking about, because what you just said is Look, people go to war over belief systems, and these belief systems are never really looked at. I mean, even a belief system that's just as fundamental as, like you said, a chair, or sometimes I'll use a car. Like I'll have someone look at a picture and say, "Is this a car?" And then they'll say, "Well, of course." And I said, "Well, are you sure it's a car? Are you really sure? Have you done the work to examine whether or not that really is a car?" And of course, through all the heuristics and the shortcuts in the brain, it's going to say yes. And then I tell it it's not a car. That's going to threaten its belief system. All of a sudden, a whole new level of energy is going to come to defend that belief system. And then a possible habit can come around. Like there's a habit that we all have of looking at that as a car when it's actually not. But luckily, looking at cars doesn't cause me much pain. I don't know about you, but I'm sure it does to some. Not. But so when we start to look at these habits, when we start to think about habits, we believe that they stem from a fundamental or an underlying belief system, quite rarely do we even explore the idea, wait a minute, are beliefs true in the first place? I mean, are we all operating from a place of like complete a complete lie to some degree? And the answer to that is yes.
So, but this is what the brain does. It just creates a shortcut in order to believe something yes or no. So it's always quite black and white in its statements to save energy. So if you ask, is 9/11 an inside job? Then it's either yes or other people are no. But it's hardly anyone says, well, maybe there's a little gray area we could look at.
Right.
But it's easier for the brain to say yes or no, because then you can save energy again. So, and realizing this, then you start to realize that everything you think, feel, and believe is just subjective nonsense in your head.
Yeah. Well, so talk a little bit about how you see that this type of, or what we're talking about, has bad habits arise. Why would bad habits arise, or habits that would seemingly work against this thing called, your life, being easy or having performance? Where do you see that this arises in your work?
Well, at this moment, our environment has changed over the last couple of thousand years, and especially in the last 100 years. So the environment has totally changed, but our brains only change 0.5% per million years. So, we're full of mismatches these days. It's like in the early days, if you wanted to have sex, you had to put a lot of effort in it. But now we got porn, so everyone's a porn addict, because the mammalian brain is like, wait a minute, I can just click one button and it's there, Sure. Why is 50% of people overweight? That's because you walk in the grocery store and everything is available. So we're not used to that. You had to hunt for your food, or you had to gather it, or whatever, but you had to do a lot of effort to get your food, or to catch your fish, for instance. And now it's everywhere. So it's totally logical that our brains are crashing at the moment, because it's like, what is happening?
Right, and we don't even get a chance to really even examine it because of the distractive nature of everything that's going on in our world.
Yes.
So the only time when we really start to look at what we're talking about is from this place of, like, I can't take it anymore. And, I've got to get out of this because I'm so mismatched with our time right now, right?
Yeah. The amount of suicides, the amount of depressions, the amount of addicts, it's insane these days. And it's all due to the mismatches. That's where it all starts.
Yeah, and so look, that's really fascinating, because I want to talk about a circumstance I had within the last year or so with this highly performing professional athlete. Before I go there, though, so would you agree that our relationship with our beliefs is first of all, it's gone unexamined, right? So we haven't really even looked at what our relationship is, and that so much of the automaticity of these millions of years of our brain right now hasn't been looked at in a way on an individual basis. Like, we haven't examined that. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and so from there, what we're doing is we're kind of machines running on all of this this falseness that for some of us it catches up with us, and we start to we really want to examine it because we really want to have a different experience. But for the majority of people, they just live in this kind of low-level anxiety through all different types of habits that don't serve and that really never get looked at, and then they pretty much die that way or kill themselves or something because it gets to get it's just such a mismatch that it's just not worth it to go on any longer.
And that same goes for companies. I mean, our brain is not created to work in a company with thousands and thousands of people because it can't connect to so many people. It can connect to your main group would be like 50 persons. 50 people, and then a group would not be bigger than 150 people. Right. So you see with gorillas, they've got groups of 10, and whenever there are too many gorillas, then they will split up, and there will be two separate groups. And with chimpanzees, they've got groups of 50, and if it gets bigger, they split up, and we've got groups of 150, which is quite amazing for the brain, actually. But now we try to put people in companies so big that people don't even know each other.
Sure.
They hardly see the leaders, and that's all a mismatch. And now we create managers, which is the worst possible thing you can do for the brain, to have someone controlling you every freaking minute. That's I always say, imagine you will go hunting on the savannah, and the manager would run next to you, holding his notebook, writing down how fast you run, how effective you are, what prey do you get to kill and stuff. We would kill the manager instantly.
Back in there, if that were to happen back in, since there isn't all of this, these crazy beliefs that are in there, they have a single focus, which is to go get the animal. And if you've got anything that's going to be in the way, they have pure action. And so what we're basically saying is in many ways, it's such a great analogy just used that all these beliefs get in the way of that's why it gets in the way of our performance, in the way of pure action, is because we have these unnecessary and useless belief systems that have gone unexamined. I want to tell you an interesting story that happened 2 years ago. I was with Paul. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, but his name is Laird Hamilton, and he's one of the most famous American big wave surfers ever of all time. And cool. He runs a kind of a fitness experience, and he does it at his house with his wife, who is a former volleyball Olympian, gold medal winner, Gabby Reese. So my wife and I went there and did an exercise kind of 3-day thing with him. It's super intense and all of that. But I was sitting down with Laird one day, and he was talking about beliefs. And because this is an ultra disciplined guy, he's super ripped, he's 55 years old, the whole thing. He's one of these guys. And so we had this conversation. He started to say, look, one of the biggest habits that I broke in my life and changed everything is I changed my habit around breakfast. Yes. So when we were speaking, he said, look, I have a different relationship with this thing called breakfast, and my relationship with it now is that it doesn't exist. That it was always made up and it doesn't serve me. So what he did was he experimented with this idea of breaking down this belief that there was no breakfast. Really, we had just kind of made this up, and that if he could just eat between 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. at night, basically, and then fast in the rest of the time, he could maintain a fitness level that he'd never seen before. Was really ripped and mainly just had water and coffee. But that's interesting to me because he looked at that and sort of dismantled it. But the most interesting thing to me was how he described hunger and how people have hunger when they don't eat breakfast in the morning. And one of the things we talked about for some time is he said, Scott, I've created a new relationship to hunger. I've changed my belief system around what hunger means for me.
Yes.
See, before what it would mean I need to satisfy it, I've got to stop it, I've got to do all these things to satiate this hunger. When in actuality, when I started to look at it, I recreated my relationship to the belief, much like what I do with many things I do in my own work. And it goes immediately, when hunger arises, it triggers something else that it didn't before. Yeah. And then basically after I saw the truth of hunger, it after a period of time, it just went away. So I don't actually experience it anymore like I did. So that habit was completely broken from all different areas because I just dismantled each piece of it. And that's a good way, I think, that we can describe, when we're talking about habits that don't serve us, how we might be able to have it, disappear. What are your thoughts on that?
No, true. If you examine things, then you realize it's merely a pattern that's installed. And because if you have had breakfast for 20 years every morning, then it's installed in your routine brain. So it by nature will go and ring the bell like, hey, it's breakfast time.
Yeah.
But you can, of course, reprogram it a little.
Mm-hmm.
And if that belief system drops and it gets out of your routine, then you just live differently without the breakfast. No problem at all.
Right. I mean, literally, that's how I do it. So I've been doing this for several years. I went from, and it was amazing the amount of weight I couldn't even believe just without even exercising. But that one belief system that I had right there, if we were looking at it, had so many tentacles, it had so much reach that I didn't even know. And then when I changed it around breakfast and around hunger, like it had this leveraged effect of all these other places it started to affect. It actually started to take out other belief systems. It had me, when I looked at that, look at other areas that were kind of attached to that. So there's real power around that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. And one last thing I'll say on this is that, you mentioned again, and it's a repeating theme, it's the pattern. It's just simply we're patterning again. So this is another look at another pattern, like everything that we're seeing, but that's what simply a habit is. So
it is, and we're so attached to the pattern, not only from a routine basis, but also because our belief system is built around it.
Yes.
And we can go deeper into that in the next podcast, but letting go of patterns is quite frightening when you're identified, because the pattern is your image.
So and that deserves an entire podcast. And in order, I want to kind of summarize things, because we started here with this idea of habits and how to break them or how to alter them and willpower and all of these. I think that if you listen to what we have been talking about here today, you'd really know that using willpower to try to overpower this brain, this incredibly powerful subconscious mind of your have is really an exercise in futility. It really it results in frustration. It results in being exhausted and all of that. The real way that we're going to break and alter patterns and habits is to look at the belief systems underneath them, analyze it, and then if that doesn't work for you, just dismantle the pattern, because from a very high level that all beliefs aren't true. So I can get there with any pattern, any belief.
Yes,
sir. Well, you have anything else to add here, Paul?
No, I think let's go on with this topic in the next podcast. We're at 23 minutes, so maybe we should end this one.
Okay.
So thank everyone for listening, and if you want to know more about us, please go to cloudlessmind.com, and we'll see you in the next episode.
You got it. See you, Paul.